Good afternoon. Welcome to the Library of Congress. I am Ken Lopez, Director of Security and Emergency Preparedness here at the library. On behalf of the Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden, and Veterans History Project Director and my colleague, Colonel Karen Lloyd, U.S. Army retired, I'd like to thank you all for joining us both in person and via live stream for today's panel discussion on Veterans Response Teams, improving outcomes for justice-involved veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder. Most importantly, I would like to thank all the veterans in attendance today and listening for their service in the U.S. military and the sacrifices that they have made for our country. Will those veterans present here today please stand or wave so that we may express our sincere gratitude. Thank you very much. I would also like to thank our moderator, award-winning journalist Jonathan ELIAS from WJLA TV, as well as our other guest speakers and panelists for accepting the invitation to share their experiences and expertise with us today. We're excited to hear from each of you. The Library of Congress Veterans History Project is congressionally mandated to collect, preserve, and make accessible the war stories of U.S. military veterans who served at any point from World War I through the most recent conflicts, so that the future generations may hear directly from veterans and better understand the realities of war. Now in its 19th year, the project has achieved more than 110,000 collections of personal remembrances of wartime service from the brave men and women who served, including audio and video recorded oral histories, original photographs, letters, diaries, journals, unpublished memoirs, wartime correspondence, and two-dimensional works of art. The Veterans History Project receives approximately 100 new collections each week and serves as a vital research for researchers, authors, filmmakers, educators, students, and veterans' loved ones. The National Institute of Corrections, NIC, is the only federal agency with a legislative mandate to provide specialized services to corrections from a national perspective. NIC provides direct service rather than financial assistance as the primary means of carrying out its mission. It responds directly to the needs identified by practitioners working in state and local adult corrections. The Federal Bureau of Prisons, the Department of Justice, other federal agencies, and the United States Congress. NIC staff provides leaderships to influence correctional policies, practices, and operations nationwide in areas of emerging interest and concern to correctional executives and practitioners, as well as public policymakers. Now in its third years, the collaboration between the Library of Congress Veterans History Project and the National Institute of Corrections is one that has benefited many. Together, these two organizations have illuminated issues at the national level that affect not just veterans living with PTSD, but also their loved ones, service providers, and communities at large. It is through open dialogues like the one that is about to take place that we better understand the plight of those who served and subsequently make the changes needed to ensure they have access to programs and resources that will make life better for them. As an Army veteran who served as a platoon leader in the Vietnam War and later as a military intelligence officer in Washington, D.C., I am fully aware that many of our men and women return from serving our great nation with unhealed, invisible wounds, often making them virtual strangers to their loved ones in surrounding communities. Some recognize the symptoms, receive a diagnosis of PTSD, and seek treatment right away. Relatively speaking, those are the fortunate ones. To many others, through no fault of their own, go undiagnosed and/or untreated for many years, leaving them at a higher risk to experience homelessness, unemployment, substance abuse, divorce, violent behavior, and suicide. According to the National Center for PTSD at the Department of Veterans Affairs, PTSD occurs in 11 to 20% of the veterans of the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, 12% of veterans of the Gulf War, and 30% of veterans of the Vietnam War. Today's discussion will cover the information of veterans response teams, which are comprised of law enforcement professionals who are trained to respond to situations involving veterans in crisis. You will hear from experts from cities across the country who have seen the benefits of having veterans response teams in place, resulting in saved lives, a decrease in hostile situations, and an increase in the number of veterans who receive the treatment they so desperately need. After the panel discussions, we will open the floor for questions from the audience. Coming to the podium next is Mr. Stephen Amos. Since November 2015, Mr. Amos has served as the chief of the Jails Division of the National Institute of Corrections. With more than 3 decades of service in the fields of law enforcement and corrections as a practitioner, researcher, and policymaker at the local, state, national, and international level, Mr. Amos has stated that he has never found anything that is more professionally rewarding. His interest in coming to NIC was that it would be most rewarding capstone in his career, doing what he loves most, supporting the professionals working tirelessly to enhance the public safety of their communities and the lives of those for whom they are charged with stewarding. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Stephen Amos.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez, and thank you for your service. Truly an honor to be here this afternoon. First, I'd like to thank the Library of Congress for our continued collaborative efforts in support of PTSD Awareness Month. Secondly, I'd like to thank those of you that have served our country, both as military veterans, but continue to do so as public servants. There clearly is no higher calling than to be a public service, and very much respect all the work that you do in the community. I'd also like to thank the leadership of the National Institute of Corrections. My colleagues have been incredibly supportive in making this a reality and ensuring that the support is there necessary to bring awareness to these critical issues and ensure that we continue to do our part to support our nation's veterans and enhance our community safeties. Additionally, I want to thank the members of the NIC-sponsored Justice Involved Veterans Network. Those who come from a continuum of criminal justice, who have collaborated over the last few years to identify what are the needs of the justice-involved veterans, but also to identify how we can interface with them and ensure that we promote public safety and ensure their larger wellness. Also, I'd like to recognize the leadership of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, specifically Sean Clark, National Leader for the Veterans Affairs Outreach Program, and Jessica Blue Howells, National Leader for the Healthcare for Reentry Veterans Programs. The Veterans Administration has been incredibly supportive, always at our side and working collaboratively to identify the opportunities, the challenges, and how we can work together to improve, work for better outcomes. Lastly, I'd like to give a special thanks to my colleague at NIC, Greg Crawford. Greg Crawford is a powerhouse of energy. He is a person that has spearheaded this effort over the course of the last 3 years, and he has truly worked hard and diligently to be the voice of the justice-involved veterans. So please join me in congratulating and thanking Greg Crawford for his contribution. As stated earlier, we're here today to bring awareness to PTSD. Additionally, we are here to release a national publication that focuses on law enforcement approaches to working with veterans in crisis in our communities. I hope each of you had the opportunity to pick up one of these documents, referred to as the Veterans Response Teams document here. This is being released today and obviously of significant interest to the field. You'll hear today from the law enforcement community in our panel about our exciting, innovative approaches to improving outcomes for veterans who may be struggling with PTSD. You'll hear personal stories about how these efforts have saved lives and promoted public safety. In this document that I mentioned earlier, it focuses on the role that specialized trained law enforcement officers play in de-escalating circumstances where military veterans pose a threat to themselves or to others, and serves as a resource to the field. So for us, this is an important milestone in our compendium efforts to build a continuum of criminal justice engagement. And again, we're very pleased to be here today, not only recognizing the contributors to this body of work, but also the engagement and the opportunity to further educate the field in terms of how we can work together in partnership and collaboration to support our nation's veterans, but also how we can enhance our communities and their safety. With that, I'd like to introduce our key person here that is very significant to me. Jonathan Thompson is the Executive Director and CEO of the National Sheriff's Association. Him and I work closely and tirelessly over the last 4 years of my tenure to identify what are the challenges that the nation's sheriffs face in working in the community and how can they best support those community efforts. Two primary areas that he always has focused on is addressing the needs of the mentally ill and the substance use co-occurring disorder. I think it speaks volumes to his leadership and his continued collaboration and partnership with us at the Department of Justice and others, as exemplified by him being here today and presenting on behalf of the nation's sheriffs. So with me, it's my honor to introduce my friend, my colleague, Jonathan Thompson.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and for those of you in the viewing audience, thank you very much for giving us a little bit of your time. I too want to thank a number of people. I want to say thank you to the library for hosting this great event. You know, as somebody who's lived in town for several decades, it's always a surprise when you can come into one of the great buildings in our country's capital and say to yourself, wow, and it's always an amazing experience. So thank you very much to the library. Secondly, I'd like to thank the entire NIC. Shana, I don't see you. There you are. Shana Vanek has been an enormous supporter of Steve's and mine, and I want to also point out that as NIC has really worked diligently over the last 4 years to kind of transform how it does things with the nation's law enforcement. So thank you very, very much. I also want to pay a special tribute to the men and women in uniform across our country. Those are men and women not just in law enforcement uniform, but also in military service uniforms. This week, as most of you know, marks an important week for us in law enforcement in the industry as well, to honor those that passed, who lost their lives in protecting us here in the nation, here in CONUS. They did so for any multitude of reasons, but public service was the two words that Stephen mentioned, and it is not just an honorable profession, it is the most honorable profession. And we oftentimes, I believe, forget them and forget the traumas and the trials that they go through. They're no less than the stress factors that those in our military face overseas. In some cases, as we're going to talk about later today, they're magnified because those in military uniform, they have that calling, and what they'll find themselves being drawn to as they come back to the United States is into law enforcement. It may have something to do with the control, the command and control environment, but I don't think so. I personally believe that it's a service that they feel innate. It's in their genes, it's in their genetic makeup. Today is really a milestone in a number of ways as well. As I was preparing to spend the next 45 minutes speaking to you, I thought, you know, it'd probably be best just to make just a few minutes. As Sheriff Lamb knows, I could go on for hours about this topic, but what I wanted to do is just pay some attention to the things that are important to you all and to the community at large. I'm going to read some words from one of the gentlemen on the podium, and it literally struck a chord in my personal life. Quote, "It didn't click for me until then about how honorable and selfless service could actually translate into offending. When you serve loyally and something happens that shatters your world and you don't get the help you need, you can easily spiral into a criminal situation." Those are the words of Major Simone, who's on the podium in the panel today. I have some personal history in this. Now, I've never worn the uniform, whether in military or law enforcement, but I am blessed to be the son of someone who served during World War II. A very quiet, strong man, my hero growing up. But he spent 31 days in Guadalcanal. Now, for those of you that don't remember your military history, which is few in this room, for those that are watching that may not, those were the 31 worst days in Guadalcanal's history. I never learned about it until my father was 78 years old. Never talked to me about it, never talked to my brother or sister about it. In fact, he never even really mentioned his military service. I can remember as a small child him finishing up his reserve duties. He would put on his uniform and he would go spend the weekend as a JAG. He would come home a different person every time. This is post-war time then. This is in the 60s. He would come home and he'd recognize that he's seen young men and women come home that had phenomenal challenges. And as a lawyer and someone also committed to public service, I could see the strain on him. Now, he is one of the majority of those coming home that had the ability to deal with his issues. How he did it, I'll never know. None of us will ever know how some of those people do it. But what I know is he was committed, as I think everybody in this room is, and everybody should recommit themselves to recognizing that the level of stress to those in uniform and those in fighting a war, who every day are in that combat zone outside the United States, away from their families, away from their kids, or away from their brothers or sisters, away from their safety net. The level of stress is incalculable. In this book, I saw a couple of things that were absolutely intriguing. It's being released today, and I want to just tell you my observations of it, and then I want to turn it back over to Steve. It's really about the confluence of causes here. It's the bringing together of our military issues and our law enforcement issues. Any given day, of the 700,000 plus people in our nation's jails, conservatively, half of them are there for no other reason than being mentally ill. Their illness caused them to do anything but end up in jail. It caused them to commit a crime. They don't belong in jail for the crime they committed. They belong with care. They belong in a hospital or a clinic. But we end up putting them in jail in this country. To me, that's tantamount to a crime in and of itself. There are alternatives, and we have to focus on those alternatives. Whether, as Stephen said, it's a coexisting condition with drug abuse or not. The most civilized nation in the world locks up, puts in jail, are mentally ill. Think about that for a minute. For no other reason than we don't have the courage of our conviction to go back and say, how can we do it better? We owe you, we owe them the obligation. It's a moral obligation to help them. Now, there are those that are very dangerous, and they belong in jails, and we get that. But when 350,000 people each day spend the night in jail because they couldn't get a medication and stay on that medication, they were kicked off of Medicaid, they were removed from the VA benefits, is that their fault? Are they really the ones to blame? No, I argue they're not. So the confluence we talk about today is where those in war and those in law enforcement come together. And I urge you all to think about the one last point I'll leave you with. If we don't, as a society, stand up and recognize the danger we're doing to ourselves, then we have no one else to blame but ourselves for the harm that we will achieve. This is not a Republican issue. This is not a Democrat issue. This isn't black or white or Asian or Hispanic. This is an American issue. These are the people that protect us every single day of their lives. They ask nothing more from us, nothing more of you than help. The hardest thing any of us have to do is to raise our hand and say, I need help. I want to thank the panel for your vision, your leadership, your willingness to come and talk about this. And I want to thank all of you, and I want to thank the library, but I also want to thank what I believe are two government agencies that are really trying to figure this out and put their arms around it. And there are probably others, but I want to pinpoint the VA. Secretary Wilkie and I have had this conversation. I know this is vexing. He knows it's vexing. And I know our new Attorney General is equally concerned. But the concern has to be brought to the forefront of our consciousness. I can't do it. The people watching can do it. The people in this room can do it. Our veterans deserve it. Our law enforcement officers deserve it. Our first responders deserve it. But those 350,000 people in our jails, because of their mental illness, they deserve it. Thank you. God bless you all. And I look forward to listening to this comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan Thompson. Truly appreciate those insightful words. Clearly, there's a lot of things that we are evaluating as we move forward in this process, but the insights you share are most valuable, so thank you. It's my pleasure at this point to introduce two individuals that will be giving comments, keynote presentation. That'll be Police Officer Jonathan Guider from Apex Police Department, North Carolina, and he's joined today by Nick Blaylock, a U.S. Air Force veteran, and they're here to share their experience. They're here to share the challenges, the hope, and the promise of working collaboratively in the community to identify opportunities to diffuse issues and challenges, but also to move the field forward and profile what can be done to assist the nation's veterans and the challenges that they face, and to train and provide skill sets and experience for the law enforcement community also. So with me, please join me in introducing both parties.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jonathan Guider.
I'm Nick Blaylock, U.S. Air Force TACP veteran.
So our incident, our kind of friendship bond began in 2014. I was working at the Apex Police Department at the time, assigned to the Patrol Division, when Nick's father had come up to the police department to ask for some help with his son. His father, and I'm really glad that his father did this, because it was what actually led to kind of the idea starting to formulate in my head of how I wanted to approach this situation. His father said, my son was in the Air Force. He's just gotten off active duty. He's just been back home for a short amount of time, and he's really having a hard time. So when I asked him what was happening tonight, he said he got mad about something. He said I moved his computer and it fell on the floor, and he completely flipped out. He went into my room and just pushed it and destroyed everything, and he didn't know how to deal with that. Because from his father's perspective, I'm the father. This is my son. I've raised him. He's not able to process that. My son's been to combat. He's watched people die. He's killed people. And that changes how your brain works when you go through those situations. So he said, we asked him the basic questions. Any firearms or access anything in the house? Just because there's a lot of situations that in law enforcement we get trained to deal with, where you see highly trained military individuals who have been in situations like this that wind up getting the deadly encounters in law enforcement on either side of the fence. He said, well, there's a shotgun, but I keep the ammo separated. He doesn't know where it is. And it's funny because I've, talking to Nick afterwards, for one of the first things he said, it was like, of course I know where the ammo was. But so when we get there, the dad he gave us the key so we could just go in. So, we were trying to do everything as safe as we possibly could for all parties involved. Gave us the key, so we unlocked the door and started calling for Nick. He was up in the attic. Like, he had opened the attic and was in the crawl space in the attic. So when we started calling him to talk down and talk to us, when he came down from the attic, he was just in a pair of swimming trunks. That was it. He didn't have any shoes on. He was bare-chested. When he came down, he had insulation on him just from being in the crawl space, and it was clear he was extremely tense. Like, both his fists were clenched. Like, you could see every muscle on his body was completely tense. And something about like the look on his face and the way of everything his dad was talking to me about reminded me of my own personal experiences when I came off active duty, because I was in the Marine Corps. I had multiple deployments, and it was just something, looking at him, it just clicked in my head. So once he came out of the attic and came down to talk to us, we just went into the living room, his dad's living room, and we sat down. And like, he sat on the couch and I sat in this chair, and we just started exchanging stories. Like, it started off like telling the funny stories that people in the military always share with each other to kind of break the ice, to let him know I'm not just another cop that's here to lock you up, because he had had some experiences with law enforcement before since he's been out, and a couple of them I didn't know until after the fact, but they had, some of the guys at the department we worked with knew him from an incident with his ex-girlfriend at the time, and they were like, oh, he's a, whatever. They didn't know him. They just knew, like, their first impression that they had gotten on a really bad night for Nick. So it could easily have gone that direction for us if I'd have just went in there and not used any of that shared experience and connection to be able to relate with him. So when we started talking, after we sat there for probably like 2 hours.
Easy 2 hours, no more.
Yeah, just talking, just sharing stories. Like, at one point, like, you could see the kind of stress melt off of him, because he went from being so tense and his fist clenched to we're sitting there laughing, telling jokes, telling stories that only people in our shoes would get and understand. But as much as I would have liked to stay there the whole shift talking to him and exchanging more stories, I did. I still had a couple more than a few hours left in my shift, and my boss man wouldn't let me stay there the whole time. So we had to come to some sort of resolution, and I got it approved by my sergeant at the time. I said, he doesn't need any sort of jail, because our department policy at the time was anything domestic. If there's any sort of physical assault or anything, then an arrest has to be made, and he had shoved his dad, like, slightly. So by our policy, he had to go. And I told Sergeant Herring at the time, I said, this is the worst thing that can happen to him. He's put himself out there, and we've made that connection. The worst thing I could do to this man right now is put him in handcuffs, take him to jail, and leave him sitting in the county jail. So I got Sergeant Herring to approve. I said, if I get him to agree to go talk to somebody tonight, will that suffice? And he said, yes. And if anything comes out about it, I told you to do it, and I'll take the heat for it. So we went and we took him to the local hospital where they'll do some of that basic mental screening, and I gave him my phone number, and I got his phone number, and I said, man, I know everybody always says it, but I legitimately mean it. Call me if you need something, anytime. And he was like, okay. And I said, seriously, I mean it. And then left him there that night. Do you want to speak for a little?
How's everybody doing? Again, I'm Nick Blaylock, Air Force TAC-P veteran, and subject of this super awesome scenario. So it was, like he said, a very tense situation. I, with my past in both the military and run-ins with law enforcement in the past, was nervous. I didn't know where we were going to go, what he was trying to do. But as I've said since we've started the CIT training, the sincerity of the officers that responded that night, primarily Officer Guider, is what put this whole wheel in motion. And I say that because, as he said, you say all the time, hey, if you need anything, give me a call. I'd do it. Everybody's guilty of it. Somewhere in there is a little bit of truth, maybe. For him, it was all truth. When I got out of the hospital that evening, my father came and picked me up. We went back home. Next day came, which every other day does. Got a knock at the door. Who's at the door? Come to the door. It's Guider. He said, "Hey, man, got you something." "What'd you get me?" So backtrack a little bit. It was my dog that was missing that started all of this. Somebody came and taken my dog from me. And being a veteran, losing my friends, I had my dog. That's all I had. And once that dog was taken from me, there's nothing I have left except to prove a point. And that's what I thought I was trying to do. When Guider came in with the sincerity of what he was saying to me, and the calmness of my dad, which showed me that they have already had prior dialogue that set the stage already, showed me that he was serious. So that day when he comes back, he says, "Got you something, got you a new dog." Who does that? You know, I just met this guy. He, as a brother that I've never met, saw my pain. There was a chance for him to act as a law enforcement officer and do what he's been charged by the state to do. But he saw, as he stated earlier, that was not the best decision for our scenario. After he came back on that day, I got my new dog, Griff. Anybody knows me knows my dog. He asked me, "Hey, are you interested in helping others, extending this, going a little bit further than where we are?" And of course, absolutely, look at what you've done for me. And I mean, it goes without saying. The officers keeping their promise that day and being sincere in what they were saying and actually caring about a brother who, yeah, probably deserves to go to jail right now, but it's just going to complicate more issues down the line, is what allowed me to go all in and accepting the help. You know, there's other people in my life, my dad, Matthew Myers. I mean, there's numerous people who helped me, but coming from the staple in a community such as a police department, where they're like, "Hey, we see another problem and we see a way out. We see a light at the end of the tunnel that is not a train. So come with me. Maybe we could help somebody else." And I feel, I haven't seen it myself, I've heard, but in my community alone, there's been dozens of incidents after mine to where the groundwork that we laid out helped ease that situation, made that situation where it wasn't detrimental. The person involved didn't have to leave a legacy of disgust. They were able to stand up after a little bit of talk with their brother, take accountability for what they've done, which is the main thing. This is not a get out of jail free scenario. This is you step up and take accountability for what you've done, and it allows you to sit back in those warrior ethos that we develop in the military. And now you have the ability to take accountability again, and it makes you feel more whole. Yeah, you're still wrong. That's not going to change whether it takes you to jail or not. The situation already happened. But being able to step up and take accountability for it and then go forward and help others in my community is what I feel like Chief Myhan and Officer Guider have given us. It's a great thing. As I said, it's not a get out of jail free card. It is an accountability check. Reality check is what some of us call, but I like to call this an accountability check. Gives you a chance to take accountability for your own. And since that, I feel like personally I've come back better as a man, better as a son, an upstanding member of my community. I have my faults. I fight my demons every day, just like everybody else. But because of this and this alone, I've become a better person. And I can't thank you enough.
That's all you, brother.
Thank you guys very much.
Good afternoon. I don't know how I follow that. I'm Jonathan Elias from ABC 7 News here in Washington, D.C. I'm also an instructor at the U.S. Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I go every year. This will be my 10th year there. I come from a family. Father was in the military. Stepmother was a homicide cop for LAPD for a number of years. So I have a unique perspective and background coming at my job and certainly coming to this panel. And in years past, I've worked with Greg on the PTSD issue, from courts to incarceration and now from law enforcement. Love that story with Griff. What kind of dog is it? Pit bull. Pit bull? My sister-in-law has a pit bull. It's the best thing ever. And it was a rescue, right? Yes, sir. I just think that's interesting. You rescued a dog, and at the same time, it rescued you. Yeah, that's good stuff. You listen to that story, and it literally strikes you as common sense, right? How many officers out there? I mean, we in the news media focus on the 0.02% of the knucklehead law enforcement officers in the country, when there's still 99.2% that are really good cops out there every day risking their lives to preserve and protect us. The thing about combat and war that I, over the years, have come to find out, and mine started 15 years ago when I came face to face with what PTSD actually looks like. And it was a young corpsman who I had done something nice for. And because I had done something nice for this guy, he literally thanked me by giving me a hug. And in that hug, he started to tremble, shake, and cry uncontrollably. And then I come to find out this young, good-looking 24-year-old kid had been on multiple tours and had seen probably the worst things you could ever imagine. I learned then there's a language of war. And unless you've been on the front lines and you've been in combat, then you don't speak that language. Don't even pretend to understand that language. It's a completely different language, and you can only learn it by being in that situation. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but I've met now enough people to know that when you come through and you understand that language, it affects everybody differently. Some people are profoundly affected, and they have a hard time, like their world gets turned upside down, and it's hard to get their equilibrium ever again. And there's others that just walk away from it, and they seem to be functioning fine, and maybe 20, 30 years down the road, they'll take an accounting of what really happened in their life, and it slows things down for them. Either way, you come away affected by it. And I think with PTSD, the hardest part about this is to understand the scars when most of the people who suffer from it will never say anything. They won't admit it to themselves, let alone admit it to others. You can't fix a problem unless you can identify a problem. And that's why this panel here today is going to help us not only identify the problem, but perhaps fix it along the way. And the interesting thing about this particular topic is if you walked into a diner, and let's say you had a young Marine in uniform, and you had an officer in uniform, police officer, those two guys would get into a fight about who's going to pay each other's bill. There's this respect that goes between the brotherhood of those in uniform. I don't care if you're representing your nation or your neighborhood. There's a respect between the two. So it's very difficult to understand when a call comes at 1 o'clock in the morning, just your domestic call, and here you have these police officers confronting somebody who may have been retired special forces, who's not only very good with the gun, but better than anybody in that entire city in any law enforcement capacity. And now they're staring straight into this guy's eyes, trying to talk him off of a ledge. And it can be very volatile, it can be deadly, and we've seen that in years past. So if there's a way, that there's a language that can be spoken between these two to maybe circumvent that particular violent confrontation, then that really is the goal. And you saw it here with the two speakers prior to me, is that it literally, they looked at each other, they understood the rage, and instead of the police officer retreating to a self-preservation role and perhaps maybe looking or leaning on his weapon for something he might need against this person, he understood that his mind was the most powerful weapon in that particular confrontation. What I want to do is let's go down the panel one at a time, starting from my left over. Introduce yourselves. Let's do the 60-second version, because last time I did this, I kid you not, there was somebody that went into a 10-minute introduction, and I said, listen, if it's Albert Einstein, okay, I understand 10 minutes, but let's, all right, so please, if you would, go ahead.
My name is Blair Myhand. I'm the police chief for Clayton, North Carolina, which is a suburb of Raleigh. I am I'm a retired Army First Sergeant, so go Army. I have had the fortune of being Jonathan's captain when we worked at another agency, and I thank God that I was a veteran when he came and told me this story between him and Nick and the success of it. And so, you know, what I did pretty quickly was, you know, not the smartest guy in the room, but I was smart enough to figure out that this was bigger than just us in Apex, and did a lot of research and was instrumental in creating what is the Veteran Crisis Intervention Training that we'll talk about here later on today, so
Right.
less than 60.
Nice job. John.
Jonathan Geider, got out of the Marine Corps January 2010 as a corporal. I was a cannon crewman, 08-11. As I said before, when I was up there, 2 deployments. Working for, as he said, he was lucky to be in that role as captain when we were at Apex, but it's one of those things that I think there's certain crossroads in people's lives where things just line up the right way, and the fact that I had that call with Nick, and then we had the success we had from that while he was my captain. So it wasn't shortly after that they shook captains around, and a different captain was over the patrol division. If it had been any other captain other than him at Apex, and I'd have come forward and when I talked to him about, hey, here's what happened, here's my idea, they'd have been like, oh, cool, and they'd have gone on about their day. But him having the same experiences, again, that shared experience, connecting me and Nick, connected me and Nick's story to him, and then he did all the he did all the hard work on it. He made all the networking, basically designed the entire training. So it was, I think all of us were the lucky ones that he was in that position.
Don't you love those humble types? Yeah, it's all him. Yeah. You started the ball rolling. Nice job with that.
To add to that, I'd like to say how honored I am to be here with these national innovators. My name is Evan Simone. In my civilian capacity, I work with a nonprofit called Swords to Plowshares, helping veterans with their second battle for benefits, which is a huge piece of this. I asked my unit in the reserves to be in uniform in recognition of PTSD Remembrance Month. Of course, the positions I share with you are from my own personal experiences.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sheriff Mark Lamb, Pinal County Sheriff. That's in Arizona between Phoenix and Tucson. I am one of 15 sheriffs in the state of Arizona, and it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be here with these men. It's an honor to represent Pinal County, Arizona, and more than 3,000 sheriffs across this country. You know, as sheriffs, one thing we deal with is we deal with the road aspect and we deal with the jail aspect in most cases. Mental health is a problem all across this country. And it is something that we consistently deal with as sheriffs, and for the most part, that has been cast on us as sheriffs. And we house a lot of people with mental health issues, as Jonathan Thompson had mentioned. Particular interest to that is I am a father of 5. I have a son who serves in the military, and I am a patriot, and I love America, and I love freedom. And I love the men and women who have fought for freedom. And the least I can do as a sheriff, even though I'm not a veteran, is do what I can to restore them to their original pride and restore them as whole as I can to send them back out to the community, which is why we implemented a pod in our jail, which I took from another sheriff in Middlesex County, Massachusetts, Peter Katusian, our Humvee pod housing unit for military veterans. So I'm a strong proponent of this, and it's an honor to be here today with you.
Good afternoon. My name is Thor Eels, and I'm the Executive Director for the National Tactical Officers Association, and I too would like to thank our men and women who have served this great country. I'm the son of an Air Force fighter pilot, the father of 5 also. What an anomaly there.
You guys both have 5 kids?
We both, same wife.
After 2.
And the father of 2 sons that are also Air Force pilots. And so the whole service and sacrifice of our veterans is near and dear to me and has been. Prior to joining the National Tactical Officers Association, I was a police officer, retired commander from the Colorado Springs Police Department in Colorado, which is the home to many large military installations in which we interface with the military on a very regular basis, most often under good circumstances, but occasionally under less than optimal circumstances. But I too have practical experience as the sheriff in dealing with mentally ill in crisis, particularly our veterans, and was very frustrated by the lack of options, but more so the lack of training that I felt that we and our officers had in how to recognize when people needed help versus an arrest or a transport to the emergency department. Law enforcement right now really has 3 ways to deal with the problem. Is they relieve the problem, they arrest the problem, or they transport the problem to a hospital. None of which are long-term solutions, and we repeat this cycle and just adds to the frustration that we all feel. And as a result of that, we've created an initiative which we call Miracle, which is the Mental Illness Response Alternative Center for law enforcement, with our primary goal of educating to protect those that need our help, veterans in need. And we're taking best practices and beginning to educate officers, fire EMS, emergency departments, mental health workers in how to create collaborative teams to provide meaningful intervention and treatment that is long-term and sustainable. And we hope to be able to answer any questions you have about that. But thanks so much for having us, and it is also an honor to be here with these gentlemen.
My name's Nicholas Hurst. I serve as a patrol officer in Newcastle County, Delaware. I served from 2004 to 2008 in the Marine Corps as a machine gunner, served 2 deployments to Fallujah, and I created a team, thanks to Captain Myhand, training in Delaware. We have 75 officers now that are certified to be a part of the Veterans Response Team in Delaware. So, and that was started because of a veteran who I served with in my unit was in crisis.
Was what? I'm sorry?
Was in crisis.
All right, let's start with questions. So I'm going to pose some questions, and feel free to jump in, elaborate as much as you want. And I'm going to play devil's advocate, because from my background and knowing law enforcement, a lot of the friends I had grew up and became officers in different departments around the country. It's got to be one of the most thankless, hardest jobs out there. They're second guessed every step of the way. The court of public opinion, they always come up with the short end of the stick. And yet they have a matter of nanoseconds to decide what they're going to do, what action to take, what force to use, that decides whether they go home to their kids or not. And they'll be the first to tell you, look, we get a lot of training, but we also have a lot of work to do, you know, to get out on the streets every day and patrol these streets. So now you're asking us to juggle even more balls. How is it that you can adequately train a foot soldier, an officer out on the street, to deal with a crisis situation when you might come across somebody who has combat experience, is undergoing or in the middle of crisis? How do you get training to that officer to make a difference and perhaps circumvent what otherwise might be a violent exchange?
Well, I guess I'll take that, since everybody's credited me with creating this training. And so, you know, what I found after Guider and I talked was, you know, I did some basic internet searching, and I found it across the country, in every city, there were encounters between law enforcement and veterans that were in a crisis. And almost every one of those that I was finding, just news reports from different outlets, someone was either injured or killed as a result in a lot of those, either the police officer or the veteran, sometimes both. And as being a veteran, and you know, and I've served in Afghanistan and Iraq, I've been a cop for 25 years, I thought, man, how tragic is it that here's an officer who is sworn to protect his community, goes out there and gets killed for doing his job. And here's a veteran who is in an all-volunteer army who has service-related injuries or combat-related injuries, comes back and gets killed by a police officer. In some of those cases, the police officers were veterans and they killed another veteran. And it's just a matter of, it has to happen. And we tried to keep this training as condensed as possible and make it practical application so they can practice these skills, so when they go out there and they get in those situations, they know how to act better.
Give us an idea of the couple of the skill sets they need in order to do that.
I would say that we work a lot on reintroducing them to what veteran is, because a lot of us get out of the military and I'm like, man, I'm out of here. I'm not you know, involved in that anymore. And you always get kind of pulled back into it. So we reintroduce them to the things that complicate a veteran in crisis, the substance abuse, the self-medication, all these things that... Isolation. Right, the isolation, the survivor's guilt, all these things that we've kind of experienced. But we really focus heavily on what Jonathan's success was that you have a shared experience. You can talk the same language, just as you mentioned, and we're able to establish a rapport and get beyond that crisis moment. Because once you get 1 second past the crisis, your chances for success skyrocket. And then you can work long-term to connect them to the resources that are going to help them get better and not reoffend and not find themselves in those crisis moments again.
You know, and a lot of it is about training, but a lot of it is about leadership. You know, you have a leader here in his agency who led by example, who showed interest in the veterans. You need leaders across this country in law enforcement that will lead by example, and those that are following them will follow. And we need, you know, I would love to see many more sheriffs adopt veterans pods and programs and crisis response teams for veterans. I think that starts with the leadership, and then you've got good folks like Geider and, what was your last? HURST, that go out and they carry it out, and they do it on a daily basis. So for me, you do the training piece, but there's also that other piece that you have to buy in as a leader.
So this would be something that your deputies, have they had this kind of training already, or are they going to get this kind of training?
You know, we do some crisis. We need to expand it more for veterans. We actually have a crisis person that goes around with one of our civil deputies, and anytime a deputy runs into somebody with mental health, they will go out and respond to it. But we need to expand that better into the veteran services as well. But where we really kicked it off was in our jail, and it's a real piece of honor for us to be able to house our veterans separately. And I think all of us, even those guys that work on the road and in the jail, have really adopted that, and that feeling of respect and honor to the veterans goes throughout your agency.
Officer Hurst, it strikes me is that when law enforcement comes into contact with a veteran in crisis, that's about the worst opportunity those two are going to ever meet. I mean, that's the most volatile and dangerous.
Especially when you don't. But the problem is you have that bond through service. So you use that bond to communicate, and you both ultimately have a common goal, which is go home at the end of the night. It's just how do you get to that goal? And it doesn't work if it's a military veteran and just a civilian cop.
It does not work.
It does not.
Is there any way to make it work? Because I would think at some point...
You can have an understanding, and as long as that civilian police officer understands how to interact with them, it makes it less violent, but it usually works better.
But it strikes me as the military is a brotherhood, just like
Correct.
law enforcement's a brotherhood. I mean, there are two brotherhoods that serve the same cause. It would appear to me that they're serving somebody else as opposed to themselves.
But there tends to be, and
a distinction.
The chief can
Well, I'll give you an
help with
example. In Colorado Springs, we found, as a result of an interaction with a veteran in crisis, that the color of our uniform was aggravating the veteran, because our uniform colors happen to be the exact same as the Afghan police.
You had kind of a khaki color?
We had a light blue color. And so the Afghani police, national police, were a light blue color. There had been, this veteran had been in a critical incident in which there had been an attack on fellow troops. So you begin to learn from those types of incidents that our greatest advantage is preparation and education ahead of time. And the sheriff is absolutely right. It starts with leadership. But law enforcement in the United States, in the basic academies, our officers don't receive any training. So unless there is good leadership that makes it a priority to have continuing education as part of that, where there is that familiarization with non-veteran based officers who begin to appreciate what veterans might be thinking, exhibiting, and recognizing, and then how to respond, it becomes problematic. But training frequently is the first bit of low-hanging fruit that's cut from a limited budget when the sheriff has to make a difficult decision. So what we're trying to do, like with Miracle, is through a public-private partnership, is create an endowment in which we can scholarship agencies and officers to, one, not only attend the training, but secondarily, if you ask the sheriff or the chief, minimum staffing levels are difficult to meet every single day. So not only is it hard to send the officer to the training because there's an expense associated with that, but then an officer has to be hired back to work that shift at time and a half, so it frequently is even more expensive. But if by working from a grassroots effort to community, we can supplement that, we remove that financial obstacles to access what is really absolutely critical training for an epidemic problem in our country today. The sheriff mentioned the Humvee pod, which is phenomenal. But I've known the sheriff a long time as a friend. He's going to be the first person to tell me and agree with me that we would rather the person never get to the pod.
Of course.
And so if we can take a very holistic approach to this through using mental health workers in the field, keep them out of emergency departments, keep them out of jail to begin with, because we provide better training to the first responders, then we win.
Yes.
On the holistic piece, I think it's also important that we can put officers in a better environment where they're able to detect that it's a veteran, and the onus shouldn't only be on the officer. For example, there's, of course, we have license plates where you can indicate veteran status. You can put it on a driver's license, and I understand that for a while in Georgia there was actually a law that allowed you to indicate a PTSD diagnosis on a driver's license, and that came with a lot of argument about whether or not that's a great idea. But other systems can also interact to better prepare officers to use these skills in this holistic approach. I learned that they had implemented a veterans traffic court in New York with this idea that sometimes the issues escalate, and you could see in driving patterns and minor driving and traffic infractions, this could be the beginning of someone's involvement into something that escalates into more of a criminal situation. So the idea is identify that veteran in need through areas where there could be crisis. And I even think we should be looking a little bit at family courts and other places where challenges are becoming too much and that veteran needs help, and then coordinating that response.
If I'm a police officer and I'm responding to a call of somebody in distress, a crisis that's playing out, and then I get that handy piece of information the person's a veteran, that ratchets it up a bunch of notches in the wrong direction, because as an officer I'm thinking I need self-preservation. I could be up against somebody who combat and fighting, that's what they're good at, and I may not necessarily be that good at it. Let's face it, there's a lot of officers out there that, they shoot once a year at a static target to qualify, and perhaps physically fit, they don't go into, jujitsu classes. I mean, let's say, so I'm imagining in their mind when they walk into a situation like that, their adrenaline is probably at peak. You don't make the best decisions when you're at peak adrenaline, do you? I mean, and officer, you'd be the best person to walk us through this. If you had not seen or recognized the clenched fist, the jaw tightening, the muscles all tense, and realized that this was somebody that was dealing with an issue that was completely unrelated to his computer falling on the floor, what would you have done then, or what would you instruct other officers to do in that situation?
Well, it's because there were so many pieces of that puzzle that got put together before I was even on scene, that trying to apply the same the same tools I use with Nick to other calls. If you took one of those puzzle pieces out from my interaction with Nick, it more than likely would have gone a different direction. Where
you see he's in the attic, you're thinking he's got a gun up in the attic with him. Did you
potentially
notice? Right.
Yes. Especially knowing that there was a shotgun in the house. There's ammunition that the dad said I keep it separated, but I mean, you can't keep ammunition hidden from 5-year-olds, let alone a combat veteran. There's something that's kind of gone. I always try to think of how to word it properly, because I don't want it to sound like in a negative way. But the best way that I can describe it is when we get in those situations, because I could have walked right in that house and he could have been in the attic and he could have had a drop on me and just took me out if he was prepared to do that, which some people are. That's the route they're going to take. But our job, if you're on a patrol car, you're in a patrol car, you're answering calls for service, you're dealing with people at the lowest points of their life, it's inherently dangerous. Now, given there's steps that we can take to stay safe and go home at the end of the night, but we're not guaranteed that when we start our shift. It's something that we have to take that risk on ourselves, that I'm in a line of work that I'm not guaranteed to go home. So let me try and help people while I can when I'm here, because at the end of the day, that's the best we got for them.
But you going into that call knowing that this was a vet in distress, and obviously with a pretty good skill set. Special Forces, is that what it was? Is that what it, yeah. So,
yeah.
So I'm imagining in your mind was that in your mind, this is gonna be my first line of defense. I'm gonna talk this guy off the ledge. I need to get him down, look him in the eye.
Absolutely.
But I think therein lies some of the danger, is that we are predisposing ourselves to thinking there's a certain outcome that lies ahead. every call for service that an officer goes to that's similar like that is potentially dangerous.
Right.
And I think it is, quite honestly, a bit of a disservice to suggest that all of our veterans are going to be predisposed to some sort of act of violence towards law enforcement. And if our officers are being prepped to think that way, I personally, based on my experiences, you're going to see young officers that might be a little bit more apt to misinterpret certain behaviors. Hence, the real need to better educate. You should, I think, approach a situation with a very open mind, that this person is a veteran, and I'm gonna treat them with respect like anybody else. I certainly use verbal skills, but our approach to managing danger does not change, nor should it change based upon, a title or anything along those lines.
We say that, but I'm just saying that the overriding bubble in a young officer's mind when he's going out there is self-preservation first and foremost.
I think it depends on our training and how we have instructed them in how to manage incidents.
And that's the key, is being able to educate your people. We talked about this. We've been here for yesterday and today through the National Institute of Corrections, through our Justice Involved Veterans Network. And we've discussed a lot of the things that we need to educate not only our officers on and our deputies, but we need to educate the public about the myths and the misnomers that are out there as they relate to law, as they relate to military. I agree with Thor. I think that, we've got everybody, you treat every case as if they had a firearm. That's how we protect ourselves. We shouldn't treat a veteran any different. We've got to train our people better to understand the humanity of the job that we do.
Of course.
And I think that's just as important as the tactics piece of it. Absolutely. And I think that as long as we as long as we're pushing and forwarding those myths and misnomers, then we're doing a disservice to the veterans.
I guess for me, I'm just trying to think, because the officer visually identified that there was a connection between the two of them, and you knew that he was a veteran, and you yourself, so that visual for you kind of just brought everything down for you. So you knew how to play it, and then at the end of the day, the humanity took over. I'm just wondering if there's a patch or a secret handshake. I mean, that's what I'm trying to get at. Can you de-escalate a situation from getting out of your car and face to face with the veteran, so the veteran knows, look, I'm not talking to somebody who doesn't know my language. They know my language.
So you can. But you're basing that decision off the connection that you're able to make with that person. I can talk to anybody in the street, and their actions will dictate my actions, and vice versa.
And so,
But
one thing that we did with our training was you talk about a secret patch. Officer Guider has a veteran pin on his uniform that we created and gave to the people who finished, completed the class. Because what we wanted was an opportunity that he could be talking to someone and that person realized, oh, you're a veteran, and that might even spark that, okay, let me calm down and see that connection. And what Guider said with Nick when he was tense and that look in his face, the reason he knew what was going on is because he's been in that same situation. Mm-hmm. And he knew what that look was. But, at that point, we didn't have that. He knew that Nick was a veteran, but Nick didn't know that when he sees him coming up, he had to establish that rapport and set that hook. And so, like if I take if I put on a short sleeve shirt, you'd say that guy's a veteran. I've got tattoos that kind of reflect that, and a lot of guys do. But, I put this on, and, maybe you would pick me out of a crowd anyway. But, veterans come in all shapes and sizes and colors, and male and female and everything. So there's a whole bunch that in here that just, we don't tattoo V's on our forehead or something like that,
And veterans are reading body language. So if an officer shows up and his body language is tense and confrontational, that's what escalates the situation. Teaching your guys to be calm in situations, a lot of that just comes with experience. But teaching those guys to be calm is what de-escalates a lot of situations, not just with veterans, with anybody with mental health issues. So it goes both ways. We're reading their body language, they're reading our body language. I think veteran helps, but that initial interaction is your body language and my body language is going to dictate how this is going to go.
Is it extensive training that's needed, or is it just an awareness that needs to be kind of applied?
It's greater awareness. We do little or no training. in basic academies. So probably one of the most advanced classes that an officer can take now is CIT, Crisis Intervention Training.
Right.
It's a 40-hour class. Now, I can tell you as a former paramedic, I received much, much more training in mental health as a paramedic than I ever did as a police officer, and I am still woefully inadequately trained to deal with a lot of these incidents. But it is a huge step towards the right direction. You know, mental health first aid can be either 8 or 16 hours, but it is creating a sense of awareness in the first responder in how to speak to people, to notice certain behavioral indicators, getting information, gathering information, and then having some means of strategy and beginning how to speak to develop dialogue. All police officers have been trained in de-escalation for 40, 50, 60, 100 years. That's not really new. But what is new is we have had significant advances in the mental health care community and certain strategies, verbal language that can be utilized, behavioral indicators from our part, et cetera, that are just woefully undertrained in law enforcement in America today.
It's not something, going back to how you said, is there a certain skill set and how much time is needed for that? I've never personally believed that it's really a teachable skill set. I think it's something, and anybody who's worked on the road or spent time dealing with the public, it's either something that it's an ability you have inherently or you don't. And in these scenarios, I think it goes a little bit further than just the ability to communicate effectively with people. I think you have to be able to empathize with others to be able to make that connection.
Tough to teach empathy.
Well, you can't teach empathy. You either have it or you don't. And if
That's
you
right.
don't, and if you don't have empathy, then it's not saying you can't make that connection. But you know, again, for Nick and I, having been in that situation before, I knew how he felt. I could put myself in his shoes, standing right there, jumping out of the attic. I hadn't jumped out of an attic exactly like he did, but I'd been in similar situations where I was like, everything could come crashing down right now. And so it was just good fortune that I was able to be the one to talk to him there that night, and having shared experiences, able to empathize with his position, it lined up to be able to benefit a lot of people.
Yeah, and we could do this training in 5 minutes. In fact, often in our classes, I show a 5-minute video where Jonathan's the star in it. And I'm like, all right, training's over, because it's not that hard of
It's
a
common
concept.
sense.
It is. We're brothers. You know, I didn't know him until a few years ago. He didn't know me. I see somebody wearing a Vietnam veteran hat in the store. I can go up and have a conversation. But what we do is we try to take the time to focus them on the issues that they're dealing with, remind them of who they are. We never compromise officer safety, and I strive that over and over again. Do not compromise your officer safety. But I've seen as much healing in the class from the officers who are in there, because some of these folks are dealing with their own issues. And, and I somewhat jokingly say this, that, my purpose in doing this is somewhat self-serving, in that when I'm in crisis one day, when I'm that guy, I want an Officer Guider coming to me, or a Nick Hurst coming to me and getting me beyond that crisis moment. It's not that hard of a concept. In fact, everybody in every department of the country can start doing it right now. We just created a formalized program where we practice it, and we coach each other. Hey, try this time. Don't just go up and say, oh, you're a veteran, I'm a veteran too, and to think that that's going to solve all the issues.
Well, and that was ingenious too, putting on the boards, because most folks in the military, when they see somebody when they're wearing their dress uniforms, they look at people's boards to see what campaigns they've been on, so they immediately identified and looked at that and saw that. So that's an ingenious move on your part as well. Yes, sir.
One other point to remember is sometimes it may be as simple as just grounding the person by saying, do you know where you are? Let's talk about where we are, because that uniform could trigger that dissociative kind of reaction where it's like, oh, I'm back wherever I was. And these are some classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And that could be all that's necessary, is helping the person.
It's always the little things, just the little things that you tweak. I know we have folks here. If anybody have any questions, feel free at any point to raise your hand. We'd be happy to take your questions. Yes, sir.
I'm a 30-year veteran, Army, National Guard Gray Area retiree. I'm also a former county supervisor. Some of my legislative responsibility included oversight of our sheriff's department. So one of the things that I've heard so far that I'm really interested in was that talk about being holistic, and also in Mr. Thompson's opening comments, his quote where he referenced that downward spiral. And one of the concerns that I have when I look at the system is that a lot of times that downward spiral starts already not when they're veterans, but when it's active duty soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen. So I'm curious about two things. First, I guess for Major Simone, and I don't know if you can really speak to this, but since you're a JAG officer, I'm curious what, if anything, the Army and the DOD are doing to try to address nipping that in the bud, because if it starts on active duty, it usually ends with a general discharge or a bad conduct discharge or a dishonorable discharge, and now you're throwing somebody out on the street who already had some issues, and you're taking away what they did have, which means they're coming in the front door for all of those departments with that pre-existing set of problems. The second thing would be, you know, with all of the law enforcement experience on the panel, if you're aware of departments in areas with a high active duty population where they can take this same training approach and not just think of it as justice-involved veterans, but a lot of times those active duty personnel live out in the civilian economy. And so the first law enforcement contact they're gonna have when they have an issue is not with the military police, it's gonna be with a civilian department. And so there's a whole continuum of things happening here, and I'm just kind of curious what your all thoughts are.
So I can speak from my own personal experience, again, not representing the position of any military organization. There is somewhat of an effort to try to really address the fact, especially misconduct during active duty, because I think we need to think about the fact that there's a lot of crimes in the military that just don't exist in the civilian world, right? So you've got disobeying a direct order, failing to show up to work, disrespectful behavior, combat and operational stress injuries. We could say someone's reaction to medication may stop them from being alert and awake and showing up to duty in the morning. That's a crime. So you have a lot more opportunities, unfortunately, to criminalize mental illness under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. In cases where it's part of the symptoms of conditions that come from serving, and serving honorably at that. So the military is grappling with this. There's a couple of different things going on that makes it a tension. One of the things is, hey, we have impressionable young soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. We need to show that there are consequences for misconduct. And if you have a unit where everyone thinks they're never going to be punished, then you'll have more misconduct and you won't accomplish the military mission. So we're never going to reach a situation where I think we'll have blanket exceptions to these rules. One of the things that exists is 10 United States Code 1177, and it's a provision that says if someone's going to get kicked out administratively, if they either say or were diagnosed with PTSD or TBI within the last 24 months of having been deployed on a contingency mission, or if they suffered military sexual assault, then that has to be considered by the command before they can kick them out with something like an other than honorable. Some people might say that's great. It certainly requires more attention. I defend clients on a regular basis. It's like, what about the 3 deployments 6 years ago? But that's not within the last 24 months, so really there's no technical requirement, and it's like, goodness. I would say it's interesting to look recently when he was Secretary of Defense, Secretary Mattis was saying we need to think about using the military justice system more to enforce discipline. We're not doing enough of it. So there's this tension. Something happened in 2017 called the Curta Memorandum. And A.M. Curta's like an undersecretary in the Department of Defense who said to the boards of correction for military records, you need to look better to see if there was misconduct that was related to mental health conditions. And you have a 5-page memo on exactly how to evaluate that for the purposes of discharge upgrading. that has not made its way to active duty. So you have to wait years until afterwards to try to bring it up. Now, when I go to an active duty board, I introduce that as evidence and I ask them to consider the standard, but technically it doesn't apply.
But part of his question too is when people are discharged and they leave in less than honorable situations, and perhaps they might be a ticking time bomb.
Right.
How good is the VA at identifying that, and how good is the military at letting a community know this is what is going to be introduced into your neck of the woods?
I know this is probably going to be one of those, not saying the VA is perfect, but
You can say that, the VA is not, I mean, they do a damn good job, but there's enough veterans out there that'll tell you they're.
But I feel like that's kind of like the easy way out approach for a lot of people is they just go, oh, the VA's terrible, I'm not getting treatment I need. But some of that does fall on the veteran that, okay, if you believe you have an issue for anything,
you got to get help.
You have to go to, you got to go, if you want not to pay for it out of your own pocket, you got to go to the VA for it. It may take a little bit longer depending on where you're at, but that's on you to get that if you want to. And having the opportunity to meet Ilario Pintano, the director of VA Affairs in North Carolina, through our training, he had a lot of things to say one time where he said for every person that had their legs blown off in a Humvee, I have 5 people filing disability claims for getting a paper cut in Germany. And you hear that and you're like, oh, that's ridiculous. And he says, but that's not to take away from the people that paper cut in Germany. That's what their job was. That was their part of the cog of the wheel. And he said, and they deserve just as much. They deserve the same sort of treatment. They might not need as much treatment, but they still deserve the same benefits. But so there's just a lot of moving parts in that. But
and I can't control what the military does or the VA does, but what I can control is what my role is. And so one of the things that we've tried in our county is we have started a veterans posse. And there's 3 missions to that veterans posse. 1, to mentor those people who get out of our Humvee program. 2, just to give some camaraderie to your veterans in your community. And the 3rd one is actually to acclimate those veterans who are coming home from deployment so that they don't, the biggest piece I think is the brotherhood, the loss of brotherhood when they leave and they come home. And if you can establish that through some veterans posses in your communities, I think you can bridge a lot of that. And so that's something we've worked on. It's going to take us a little while to get it as robust and as functional as I would like to see it.
And that can be as simple as just going over the house saying, hey, welcome back, and
Exactly.
have coffee with them, talk about what they experienced, stuff like that.
John, can I answer his
Sure,
second question?
please.
You talked about communities have high veteran populations, and so where we were at in Apex and now in Clayton is not one of those communities, really. But the value that I've added to this effort is that I've taken opportunities to speak all around the country. I've spoken in Chicago, in San Diego at the International Association of Chiefs of Police Annual Conference, and I've gone to chiefs and said, here's what we're doing. It's free. I'm not making any money off this. We try to remove every obstacle. I mean, I can't pay for your travel, but we provide lunch. We do everything that's free to get somebody there. And so that's how Nick got involved in this. In fact, Thor, you'd be happy to know that I have somebody coming from Colorado Springs PD next week for training. There are 4 counties in North Carolina now, Cumberland County, which is Fort Bragg, Durham County, Wake County, and Johnston County that are teaching this program. They're doing it in Delaware. They're doing it in Dayton, Ohio. I go and say, come to me. I'm a police chief. I can't travel around the country teaching this program. But if you can come to me, I'll teach you. I'll give you everything that we have created over 5 years. It's free because I want you to go home and do the same thing so you can save somebody's life. I don't, if St. Peter puts me at the front of the line one day because of what I did here, great. But we want those high veteran population communities, and the fact that Cumberland County, Fayetteville, North Carolina are now doing this, and they've got 25 officers from the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office and Fayetteville PD, and they're interacting with veterans every day. We don't deal with that every day like that. So it's critical that those communities do this because they're dealing with veterans that are either on active duty living in the community Or a lot of times, you get out active duty and you just stay.
If someone was kicked out with bad paper, they may think, oh, I'm never going to get the VA services I need. It's not even worth it. That new memo that came out about upgrades, it's worth letting them know. It's worth trying again because the standards have changed, especially for people who are already out. And one other thing is from the community coordinator managing perspective is try to find out if someone's headed out of the military with one of these discharges and try to work around that before they get out to set them up for the most success as they make their transition.
You had something to add as well.
Well, I was going to mention to your point, I think it's the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And, that's what we're really trying to do. And in Colorado Springs, one of the things that we do is we have a monthly military collaborative meeting between the military and law enforcement leadership. And we talk about these issues, particularly veterans having difficulties, integrating back, et cetera. So, programs like the sheriff's, phenomenal. They need to be replicated. The problem in the United States is we have 22,000 different law enforcement agencies, which means there's 22,000 different ways of doing business.
Approaches, yeah.
And we're constantly reinventing the wheel. So the chief's got a great program in North Carolina. I hate to say it, there's a lot of agencies that still don't know about it, never heard about it.
But the way to look at this is just a layer to add to your training, that's it.
There's a lot more to it, but you get engaged in that. What we do is we have a police officer, paramedic, and licensed social worker that interface with the military on a regular basis ahead of time. But one of the problems that happens with law enforcement when you interface with a veteran in crisis, we may have those limited tools, but we don't even fully appreciate what are all of the resources in our own community that we can steer them towards. That's that prevention component of it, is if we can better educate them, we can steer them in those directions as well.
Great idea. We have another question. Yes, ma'am.
Well,
Thank you for being here today. So I'm curious about a couple things, and I'm thinking about some of this in terms of risk and protective factors. And perhaps one of the protective factors is education and training. Maybe that's something that we're hearing. Is there a need for a more formalized education and training program, and that will fall in more of the protective factors realm? And if so, is that something that needs to be formalized nationally?
Are you talking about like at the police academy, add a course for young officers or cadets to pick
Really
up
not
on?
Sure how it would happen.
I can tell you from an
Through
administrator.
grants or, yeah.
That's what we would need. Honestly, a lot of us struggle with training because of the budgets.
Yeah.
Where the federal government could really help us is not necessarily, we talked about this in our meetings, not necessarily mandating certain things, but providing the funding for us to be able to do the trainings, to be able to send people to get the adequate training. You've got law enforcement officials that have figured it out in certain categories, yet all of us are so struggling with budget. So that would be a big piece. The federal government coming in with a lot more money to be able to help us educate our guys.
And that's what we're trying to do with Miracle, is a combination of federal funding, but what we're also doing is working with a lot of private sector, philanthropists, foundation, community groups, so that one, we're not beholden to federal money, which can come and go depending on how things are working out at the time, but it's sustainable and it's grassroots. It creates an opportunity for law enforcement to interface with the community, to get to know one another, to know the needs. And then through Miracle, a lot of the programs allow the community participants to design their own alternative response programs that will work in their communities. Not all communities are the same in the United States. And we have rural areas, we have urban areas, all those resources differ. So that's why we have that flexibility. But funding is a huge obstacle to law enforcement training.
Hold on, Officer Hurst, you had 2 seconds, you wanted to add something.
So for that gentleman's thing, and I'll answer yours as well. A lot of this is based off data collection. Data collection hasn't really taken place, and it's hard to find that data. So, like for instance, most people don't know that reservists have a higher percent rate of PTSD diagnosis than active duty. Another one is 9 out of 10 people that serve in the military have not served in combat, but yet they have a PTSD diagnosis. Now, granted, PTSD, you don't need to serve in combat for diagnosis of that. But a lot of it's breaking those barriers and having data to support that so that we can go to the chief and we can go to the sheriffs and say, hey, we need money for this training, this is why. But since nobody's collected that data, we can't go that way. And there's, like, even for me, and I'm sure the other panelists, until I started working this route of setting up the team, I didn't know half the resources out there. And I am a veteran. And I have more access to those resources than the average veteran does because I've been out there digging to find them so that they can help our team out.
Yeah, you'd like to think that those things are hiding in plain sight for all to see. And I guess from the law enforcement standpoint, if you're going to go into battle, you need to know what your resources are. And if the battle is to win over the hearts and minds of returning vets, then you got to know what's in your arsenal, i.e. programs that you can call, people and resources that you can reach out to. It makes perfect sense.
Like the Veterans Treatment Courts. I mean, how many people in this room know that we have Veterans Treatment Courts throughout the United States?
We do, because that was last year's panel, so.
Yeah.
What I'll say with respect to the training real quick, I know there's another question, but what we found that worked based on our own experiences is we've really focused on local resources. And so we built our program that was scalable anywhere in the country. And so when Nick came and got the training, we trained him on these things that are consistent. Substance abuse among veterans is substance abuse among veterans. It doesn't matter if you're in Delaware or North Carolina. But what Nick had to do, and thank God that he did this in Delaware, is he went home and identified all those local resources, because the resources he has in Delaware are different than the ones I have in North Carolina. They're different than the ones I have in Fayetteville. So it takes someone in that local department, that county, to say, I'm going to be the champion of this program, and we're going to identify all these nonprofits that work in our communities, and those are the ones that we're going to rely on first. The VA is going to be the follow-up. So we want to find the dogs that we can give somebody.
And for anybody watching right now via the internet, any deputy sheriffs, or police chiefs, the internet is a wonderful resource that can expedite the process very quickly. Hang on, we got another question. One more question, then we got to wrap things up.
Hi, I'm a lieutenant with the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services in Maryland, and we started in February a pilot project at our prison to have a veterans tier like you have your veterans pod. I was wondering if you offer your veterans any specialized programming to help them during their incarceration and for when they get out.
That's a great question. We actually have them busy from 8 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon. We have Alcoholics Anonymous they go to. We have art. We have canine therapy. We actually have probably about 8 to 10 different therapies that come throughout the week, to include people that are specialized in dealing with PTSD and helping them recognize the PTSD. So yes, it is very program heavy, and it's kind of nice because people say, well, don't you care about your other inmates? And what I can do is I can actually try these programs on a micro level, and if they work, I can roll them out on a macro level throughout the rest of my facility. So it is twofold. I can address the veterans, but at the same time, I'm learning about how I can help the rest of my population as well. Absolutely, yes.
He's easy to find. He's the big guy with the cowboy hat. We gotta wrap things up. I thank you very much for being here this afternoon. Thank you for your great questions and your involvement as well. I hope to see you tonight on the news. This is my shameless plug. It's ABC 7, 5, 6, and 11. Make it a part of your religious behavior, please, every day, okay? Thank you for being here. Have a great day. Thank you guys very much. Great job, Jonathan, great job.